Welcome to Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. We are live on Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube. Appreciate you joining us. However, and wherever you may be listening to us, you can also download and subscribe to the Inside the Mavericks podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcast for free. Make sure you give the podcast a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. Doing a live show on this Friday as we get you ready for the Mavericks taking on the Houston Rockets. They're also taking on the San Antonio Spurs on Saturday as well. So a lot of ground to cover here on the show today. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. You can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Avseth. Make sure you subscribe to his YouTube channel as well at Grant Avseth. You'll be able to watch this video there as well. As I bring in my partner, Grant, on this Friday. Grant in Houston as the Mavericks get ready to take on the Houston Rockets on Friday. Grant, what's going on?
Not much. Definitely looking forward to covering the game tonight. Will be interesting to see what lineups are used, and definitely with all of the G League players as well being with the team, seeing who gets opportunity will definitely be interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because the Mavericks have a ton of injuries right now as far as the game is concerned for tonight. No Luka Doncic. He's not going to be available. Dante Exum also not playing in this game. We already knew that Kyrie Irving, Dereck Lively, Josh Green, Maxi Kleber were not going to play, but it feels more like, Grant, and you can speak to some of this more as well, the idea that it looks like the Mavericks are trying to give Luka Doncic the opportunity to rest because he's been playing, heavy minutes, over 40 minutes in, last several ball games here, and trying to give him an opportunity to rest his legs a little bit. That's what it feels more like to me versus anything when you go into tonight's game that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think after a lot of recent games, he's talked about, well, not necessarily in the last two, but in some of the recent home games, he's mentioned afterwards about how he's playing through things. And, that definitely is going to only add up if you continue to play 40-plus minutes and, have to face defenses like the Clippers that he had to face with, being the sole superstar available. They're really loading up on him, being physical. And, there's just not too much relief throughout the course of a game. And, Jason Kidd also talked about that after the game where he mentioned right now they're struggling to find too many players that can cause a problem for the defense, which basically means, drawing multiple defenders with double teams, drawing aggressive help rotations, and then creating open looks for other players. And the two players that really do that on the team are, Luka and Kyrie. And if Kyrie is out, then that's a lot of burden placed on Luka.
And there's going to be a lot of burden placed on a lot of guys tonight when you look at who's got to be able to step up to take over that scoring load. And without Luka Doncic as your primary facilitator and the ability to not only be your primary, passer and scorer, but also really being able to start things on the fast break, getting up and down in transition, they're going to have a tough time tonight against a Rockets team that you look at. The Rockets are still ranked 6th in the NBA in terms of defensive rating at 110.4, but at the same time have struggled, a little bit as they had their 11-game home court winning streak snapped on Wednesday when they lost to the Hawks 134-127. So both these teams coming into tonight's game, off of a loss, but at the same time, defensively, the Mavericks have continued to struggle, allowing multiple opponents over the last 4 or 5 games to shoot over 50% from the field. You saw it against the Clippers the other night where they allowed them to shoot nearly 56% from the field. It doesn't matter how much you score. Defensively, they have not been able to stop people. And we saw in the last 4 minutes of the game, the other night against Los Angeles, they were not able to get stops in the last nearly 4 minutes of the game where Kawhi Leonard, scored 10 points in the last 4 minutes of the game. They wound up going, on what was a 14-3 run to close the last 3:46 of the game, and they just could not find a way to get stops, even after overcoming a 22-point lead in that game against Los Angeles. You being in the building, what was the tone and the tenor as they obviously made the comeback, were really good in the third quarter. They only allowed 18 points. Tim Hardaway Jr. had 3 steals in the period, but as the game went on, especially late in the fourth quarter, how things kind of changed a little bit for the Mavericks in that way.
Yeah, I think when they went with that small ball lineup, there was a lot of momentum that was generated. They were able to fly around the half court, force turnovers, and really get out in transition on leak outs. And, with Grant Williams, Derek Jones kind of playing the 4 and the 5, kind of interchanging those responsibilities, that definitely was a different look than we've seen frequently throughout the season. They've tried it in like small spurts, but I think, that run at the end of the game that you mentioned too, that the Clippers went on, there was definitely a clear like letdown in terms of clutch execution defensively, where I feel like they just didn't have enough of an extended amount of reps together to really know where to be in terms of help rotations and really honing in on someone like Kawhi. He pretty much picked them apart with those 2 plays towards the end, where he basically like had that drop off pass, attacking, drawing, help defenders in the paint, and then set up a easy point blank finish for a teammate. And then he kind of put the final exclamation point on the night by attacking baseline. No one was in position to help, and then dunked it out of that baseline drive. So I think overall, they're going to have to really hone in on the details of where to be, when to be on defensive rotations when they play that sort of personnel. And that's to be expected if you're not really utilizing it often. And at halftime, that's the adjustment you feel you need to make. And, it actually was an interesting overall like kind of approach, because the Clippers felt that they wanted to keep Zubac on the floor and not adjust to the Mavericks. But it was a good sign whenever you have a personnel combination where the opposing team feels they have to adjust to you. And the Clippers tried to weather the storm with Zubac on the floor, but then they took him off and then try to match playing small. And that's also a different situation when you haven't really played small often, but then now are facing other teams, small ball personnel, let alone the Clippers. That's going to definitely require more, extended opportunities to really like, clean up some of the details and, things like that. So I think there was a lot of momentum early on. Dwight Powell came back in, and that kind of deflated some of that momentum because they really struggled to protect the paint. And that kind of leads us into tonight and some of those recent defensive struggles is that, without Dereck Lively on the floor, whether that's him not playing in a game at all or just being on the bench during a game that he's active for, they've sorely struggled to protect the paint. So how they managed to do that against, a Rockets team with Alperen Şengün and a couple other, pretty dynamic threats will be interesting to watch. But definitely that small ball group, I'm curious to see how much they'll lean on that to really try to, mix things up and try to, create advantages.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple things that concern me going into tonight's game, looking back from what happened, the other night against the Clippers was, as you mentioned, the inability to protect the paint. And I'm not going to lie to you, when Kawhi hit that Euro step on Grant Williams and Luka Doncic to finish at the rim, I nearly fell out of my chair because the move that he put on the both of them and the way that he finished out that game. I know Kawhi Leonard has done damage against the Mavericks in years past, but it feels like for him, he's getting back to the point. I know he didn't play, last time when they lost to the Thunder, dealing with the hip injury, but at the same time, he looked like the guy from 2021 who was just out here just wrecking the Mavs in any form or fashion that he wanted to. And you look at tonight's game against the Rockets with no Lively in the paint, Alperen Şengün is a guy who can really be able to do a lot of different things, close around the basket, good passing big man as well. He can do a lot of different things that can make things difficult for the Mavericks without a lot of paint presence in there. So they're going to have their hands full with Şengün in the middle because he's a skilled big man that can do a lot of different things as he helps facilitate offense, even from the, within the post and those kinds of things that he's capable of doing there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another element too to really consider with the, when you look at the matchup, without Luka or Kyrie, that's going to be a lot of pressure on everyone else to generate offense as the creator, like initiating things. With Dylan Brooks as a point of attack defender, one of the best in the NBA, that's going to be really challenging for, probably Jaden Hardy or Seth Curry, whoever's trying to create advantages. Tim Hardaway Jr. will often as well. And so to be able to keep pace with a threat like you mentioned with Şengün, that's going to be a very challenging set of circumstances because matchup-wise, they're not well-equipped. But on the other end, the Rockets are well-equipped to be able to contain, the available players that the Mavericks will have tonight. And, overall, Jabari Smith Jr.'s played well lately as well, too. And if the Mavericks are going to try to go small, I'm curious to see if the Rockets will try to match them at some point with Jabari Smith playing a big role because he has that ability to slide over to the 5. But if the Mavericks are not able to contain Şengün, then, there's no point in matching the other team's style if you're getting the job done anyway. So just a lot of little things throughout the course of the game will be interesting to watch from that regard. As Jaden Hardy will probably take on, a larger role than he's had throughout this season in a lot of these games, because he hasn't had an opportunity, with Luka only missing what will be a second game. And, this will be the first time Jaden Hardy will play since last year with both Luka and Kyrie out of the lineup. He's going to be able to show what he's been able to progress with in terms of getting the offense organized, making plays consistently out of pick and roll, isolation, things like that, that were focus areas where he, wasn't efficient again in his second summer league. And I guess he hasn't really broken up to that next level yet in his development to start the season with his inconsistent rotation role. So how that manages to, look tonight will be interesting against a tough, Rockets team that is very good at home, as you mentioned at the start of the show.
It's interesting because for Hardy, he had 15 points in the game against the Clippers. Hopefully that game will allow him to springboard and have some confidence based off of the way that he was shooting the ball and really help the Mavericks get back into the game, on Wednesday night, to hopefully be able to carry some of that over, in the game against the Rockets. From Silver and Blue 82 in our chat, what's D-Live status? We need him big time. Look, the good news for him and Kyrie is they're both out of walking boots. So at least there's a moniker of progress that you're seeing, for the both of them, but he will not be available tonight. And I doubt that he will be available tomorrow, obviously, against the San Antonio Spurs. And we'll see what his status looks like going into the game on Christmas Day against the Phoenix Suns. And that's one thing that I wanted to touch on in our show today, because not only what we saw against the Clippers, on Wednesday, what we saw on Monday against the Denver Nuggets, taking on a very good defensive team, in the Houston Rockets tonight. And you touched on it in one of your latest articles. This is a team now that's 8-9 over its last 17 games. And while there have been significant injuries for this team, obviously with with Kyrie, with Dereck Lively, Josh Green, Maxi Cleveland not being available, and now Luka missing tonight's game. Is there something aside from the injuries and what we've seen defensively that has caught your eye, and what has been some struggles for this team after they got off to a 6-1 start that now has seen them over the last 17 games, as I mentioned, now 8-9 based off of the teams that they've been playing? I know the schedule's been a little wonky in terms of some of the travel, the road and home back-to-backs, which they have again starting tonight with a road game against Houston, then a home game against San Antonio on a back-to-back. So another interesting, weird quirk in the schedule there. But what has stood out to you over the last 17 games?
Yeah, I definitely think the heavy reliance on Dereck Lively's rim protection has been a very important factor. He's overachieved in what he's been able to do as a 19-year-old rookie, but then when he's not on the floor, they haven't really had a rim protector emerge with undersized options. That's to be expected, but that's also something to kind of consider. Thinking about the rest of the season in terms of roster moves and ideas, is that if you don't have that sort of option to anchor the second unit like they probably hoped. I know he was promised a starting role last July, but they probably hoped JaVale McGee could emerge as that sort of guy. Being able to be that athletic rim protector and to be able to provide that presence, and not having him or a player like that filling a role off the bench behind someone like Lively definitely is something that requires more execution, like on-ball containment from the rest of the defense. And, right now they've really struggled with that. Some of those quicker options, against Grant Williams, he's not someone that's going to really laterally slide and contain at a high level. He's more of like that, as we talked about frequently on the show, more of a power player. Like he's going to try to hold his own against, a bigger player who's trying to, make a quick move still, but not necessarily east to west, more like just kind of playing through contact. And, Derek Jones is often handling those quicker guys out on the perimeter. But, even then there's a lot of players that are able to have, big nights in the NBA with how, the rules kind of limit you on hand checking and things of that nature. Like Anthony Simons was often guarded, in Portland against Derek Jones, but he just got to the spots that he wanted frequently during that game. And then, against Anthony Edwards in the Minnesota Timberwolves game recently, Jones did a great job of, controlling what he could control and forcing a bad, shooting performance for him. So it's going to be inconsistent based off of like the limitations of how like the point of attack can kind of make that impact in today's NBA, which puts even more stress on the rim protector and makes it more important to have multiple options for rim protectors, especially if one of them is going to be, or well, not one of them, your only one is going to be injured.
Yeah.
That puts a lot of stress on the overall defense. But regardless, on-ball containment will have to be better, no matter who is playing the 5 spot. And that's definitely like a big part of what's caught my eye. But I think a contributing factor to it is just the lack of perimeter size once again that the team has with this roster. They've been solid defensively with Jones and Williams on the floor together this season. But once you get past them or and you play with those plug and play lineups, they're a very small group that's try to throw out, small perimeter combinations to create advantages. And, by getting out in transition and being faster.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're going to run into a lot of problems with, some of those top teams in the West and just teams in general in the NBA where they have more like 6'8" and above players that are naturally going to have physical advantages against those sort of combinations. But I think another thing overall has just been the need for another player to step up and be able to create consistently offensively. As we mentioned with the Kid's comment about needing someone to really create a problem for the defense by drawing those double teams and at least drawing help rotations. That's somewhere you would like someone like Jaden Hardy to emerge. And that kind of leads us into tonight because he's going to have the opportunity to showcase that and build on his continued development. But just overall, I think how he handles getting the offense organized, how he handles just consistently being efficient, and how he creates pick and roll offense, isolation opportunities, and things of that nature, I think are going to be very important to monitor throughout the rest of the season. Because if he can step up into that third creator role, kind of like how they had Spencer Dinwiddie during the Western Conference Finals run, that's something that we commonly mention. That would be important. And, Dante Exum has made a big impact in the things that he can control. But I think he's mostly like that connective player. He's not really going to run a ton of like high pick and rolls. He's been able to have success in pivotal moments of games where Luka's a screener for him and he's attacking hard right to get to the paint and really make plays from that point on. And as we mentioned, he's been able to redrive, throughout games and, create problems with his size and, make plays with the pass or the finish. But I think they definitely need someone who's more of that explosive scorer to be able to step up into that role and handle things, like we've talked about. And I think Hardy's probably like the general style of player that he is. Having more impact within that style will go a long way when someone like Luka or Kyrie is out. And that's something that's really stood out to me is because they try to rely on him a lot last year out of necessity.
Exactly.
But now it's like you're going to have to be able to consistently turn to it and stay afloat without one of those guys available. And that's not necessarily a fair comparison because you're not going to say, I need you to replace an NBA All-Star starter exactly perfectly. And if you don't, you're not meeting expectations. But just like to be a consistently helpful initiator of the offense, make plays, be efficient, take advantage of things that happen within the flow. And those are all things that he's working on. So it's not to say that like if he doesn't have a great game tonight, he's not developing by any stretch. But just like tracking that and having him continue to progress throughout the season, I think will be a very important factor as they naturally will deal with injuries as any NBA team would throughout a course of an 82-game season.
Yeah, and I think that's what I will take some solace in. And I think for Mavericks fans who are watching this difficult stretch right now, we'll take some solace in as well, is that even with everything that this team has gone through so far, the hot start that they got off to, Grant Williams starting off the season really well, has struggled, as of late with some inconsistency, shooting the basketball and defensively, which, is not something that Mavericks fans want to hear necessarily, because that's one of the reasons why he was brought over here in terms of being a guy that can really guard multiple positions on the defensive end. But for all the injuries that they have suffered, for them to be where they are still holding down, the 6th spot right now in the Western Conference, I think that's why I personally won't hit the panic button just yet, because with all the things that they've been able to go through in terms of what we've seen from them offensively when they've been really good, defensively we knew that they were going to struggle quite a bit this year, and we felt like if they could be average this year, then that could be something that would allow them to win maybe 45, 50 games as far as that's concerned. But at the same time, what they have been dealing with They have got to figure out a way to be able to withstand the storm here, which I'm sure is a message that Jason Kidd and this organization are preaching right now. Look, let's get through some of these injuries. Let's get Kyrie back. Let's get Dereck Lively back. Let's see where we are by the time the calendar turns to January in 2024, and then be able to start to make a push as we get toward the All-Star break. Because I think that's when we will see this team get back to some of what we saw from them early on this year, a team that loves to knock down threes when they're hot, but also with Lively's continued growth in the middle there, some of that will hopefully be relieved. And by the time we get to the All-Star break, maybe there's a move that can be have been made when we get to the trade deadline that allows them to create some depth. Because I think the other thing I'll take some, a breather with when it comes to this team is, you mentioned with Exum and Hardy and Derrick Jones Jr., we've seen some of the depth pieces have to step up and play a lot more than maybe what we've wanted to see so far this season. And in a lot of ways, guys like Exum, Derrick Jones Jr., both of them have been pleasant surprises for this team. So with the depth that's hopefully being built based off of what we've seen so far, and if Josh Green can reemerge as a guy that can be a dependable piece on both the shooting the basketball from three, but also on the defensive end, you should feel a little bit better about what those guys can bring as the season goes on, while still trying to figure out how do you get some more depth within that front court to help out Dereck Lively, because the amount of dependence on a 19-year-old at this point in his career, while it's really cool, it's also rather terrifying to think that all of this dependence is on this kid to be what he has to be for this team defensively and offensively as a rim runner for Luka Doncic. They've got to find some depth to help that front court a little bit, but at least the depth for this team you're seeing be tested, and in some ways responding rather well, that hopefully gives Mavericks fans some confidence that as they get healthy, those pieces will be able to fall into place and everyone can kind of fall in line based off of what their skill sets and rotations should be when they're fully healthy in that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's a very considerable need for that extra rim protection presence, because that would really enable, as you said, pieces to fall in line, especially if you are going to try to play smaller perimeter combinations, 1 through 4 during the flow of a game. It really goes a long way to have someone who can protect the back line and not really have it be Dereck Lively every time. So that's definitely probably the pretty high on the list. If not, you would also like to get bigger on the perimeter as well. Those are probably two things that could be beneficial to accomplish in their own right and collectively. But with the only having a 2027 first round pick to be able to trade mid-season in terms of draft capital, that would probably be hard to accomplish overall unless they get creative. Because honestly, when they went out and got Dante Exum, I can't say that was very high on the radar for moves that could have been made, and that's paid off very well. So whether they can identify some buy low talent or something like that and have it pay off during the stretch run of the season, I think that would definitely be a helpful outcome. But that's also something that you don't necessarily want to count on, because having to hit home runs on margin moves over and over again, definitely that doesn't really happen in the NBA unless you get a good element of luck involved with that, because there's a reason why a lot of players are available, and to have all those things go your way is definitely not a frequent occurrence for sure.
I encourage folks to check out Bobby Marks' latest piece. He's got the 30-team roster breakdown on ESPN, where he's got all 30 NBA teams, the capital that they have, the draft picks that are available as we start to get closer to the beginning of 2024 and we get toward the February 10th trade deadline, about what the Mavericks have in terms of, trade pieces, what they have in terms of draft capital that's available to them. You mentioned as far as, the draft pick is concerned, as far as the ones that they can trade based off of what they still owe to the New York Knicks, because people forget the Mavericks still owe a top 10 pick, protected first at that, in either 24 or 25. So that Kristaps Porzingis trade still lingering over the organization still at this point, as they still have not conveyed that pick. But I would encourage people to definitely check that out to give you a better idea of what's available, so that you can start to piece together when you're putting together your mock trades and your trade machines and all of that, what you can have available to start looking at and seeing what could the Mavericks do if they decide to make a move there. The last few minutes of our show today, as we mentioned, Mavericks taking on the Rockets on Friday. They take on the San Antonio Spurs on Saturday. Mavericks, Rockets, both coming off a loss. San Antonio recently broke their long losing streak when they got a win over the Los Angeles Lakers, a while back. So another team with size, hello, Victor Wembanyama, that's going to be dealing with the Dallas Mavericks. When you look at both of these games overall, I said coming into this difficult 3-game stretch that they had with the Nuggets and the Clippers and now the Rockets, and then with San Antonio on Saturday, that they had to find a way to split these games and go 2-2 based off of what's happening right now from an injury standpoint, going into Friday's game against the Rockets and then back home against San Antonio on Saturday. I find it very difficult for them to find a way to get 2 wins over these next couple of games. I would think Luka Doncic would probably return on Saturday to play against the San Antonio Spurs, given the fact that I think Friday's game is more of a rest for him against the Rockets. But I thought that they could at least go 2-2. It doesn't necessarily look like that's going to happen, especially with the limited amount of personnel that they're going to be dealing with on Friday night. How much is that a setback as they get ready to take on the Phoenix Suns on Christmas Day when they take on Phoenix on the road on Monday?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on how much the recoveries progress for some of those key players that are out before that Christmas Day game, because the Suns have struggled in their own right as well.
Mm-hmm.
They can definitely make any team pay if they're having Kevin Durant and Devin Booker going off on the same night for sure. But I think assuming that Luka will return and this is a 1-game resting opportunity, and the other key players are able to return to the lineup as well. Well, not all of them, but some of them, maybe like a Dante Exum, depending on what his injury situation is, which we'll know more about tonight with the pregame injury updates on, kind of the intricacies of, I shouldn't say intricacies because they have been very reluctant to give us timetables on anybody. So maybe a little bit of detail and, along those lines. Hopefully we can get an idea of who will be available, closer to that Christmas Day game. Because as you said, it will be very challenging to get a win tonight. They have a better opportunity to get one tomorrow against the Spurs, assuming key guys return. And then that Christmas Day game, maybe with Luka in the lineup, they can, catch them on their home floor, on national TV, having a big performance that you'd expect from Luka. It'll be very challenging if Dereck Lively's not in the lineup for that, though, because, regardless of the matchup, it seems like they're pretty much going to struggle to protect the paint without him. Like, I think the Clippers went like 24-25 at the rim in last
Something
game.
absurd. Yeah.
Yeah,
they scored 120 points and 60 of them came in the paint. Yeah.
Yeah, you can basically count on getting like kind of blasted in the paint and like without Lively on the floor is essentially what is boiled down to at this point. And that's why I think that small ball lineup will be very interesting to see if they deploy it tonight more, because that's kind of their best option to get away with the personnel that they have available and kind of open the floor up more for someone like Jaden Hardy. He actually mentioned. The context was about how it impacts Luka and benefits him with the way they play small to be able to open things up for him to create. But for him personally as well, I'm sure that vision would still be the same, to be able to get in the paint with more room and make plays for his teammates. That would probably be a helpful option for him tonight, because he's going to have to deal with, some of those tougher on-ball defenders. Dylan Brooks has, stamped himself as one of those like top premier on-ball defenders. Fred VanVleet definitely is a strong defender as well, and Jabari Smith's a versatile guy that can play that like low man role, rotating into the paint, and also pressure playing up and ball screen coverages too. So definitely going to be a good test for them tonight, and I'm curious to see how they approach tactically handling and countering those things for sure.
Yeah, and what they're able to do to see what these young guys do to respond, because I think for a lot of folks going into tonight and seeing what that looks like for them is going to be of huge importance based off of what we see in terms of the projected starting lineup. As I look at it here, we've got Derrick Jones Jr., Grant Williams, Dwight Powell, Dante Exum. It has Luka Doncic, but we know that he's not playing, so that'll get adjusted, with the game notes as far as that's concerned there. So, look, the Mavericks, I thought real quick, when they went small against the Clippers on Wednesday, I found that to be a very interesting wrinkle that Jason Kidd decided to go to, because at that point, Luka Doncic was your biggest player on the floor, and you're having Zubac try to deal with Tim Hardaway Jr. at the 5, and you saw a couple times he was able to get to the rim. But I thought more importantly, they sped the game up in terms of getting into passing lanes and defensively creating some havoc in terms of some steals and trying to put pressure, on the Clippers, where I believe in that third quarter alone, they forced 7 turnovers. So you saw how they were able to create pressure additionally with that smaller lineup. Something will maybe have to be done similarly against the Houston Rockets, because if you don't, they've got Şengün in the middle, as you mentioned, with some good shooters with Fred VanVleet and other guys that can knock down some shots, especially from the perimeter at times. They're going to try to make things a little bit more difficult, on the Mavericks. So I'm very interested to see how these young guys respond, what they try to do to create some different looks against Houston, but more importantly, how they respond to Houston defensively, because we know that they're one of the better defensive teams in the league and what that looks like. So I'm very, very, very curious on how this plays out against the Houston Rockets. And then on Saturday against the San Antonio Spurs, as they get ready to take on, Victor Wembanyama. And then on Monday, when they take on the Phoenix Suns on Christmas Day. So a lot of things to sort out for this team when it comes to the next few games, based off of what they're looking to do and how they're trying to get a win. Because I said going into tonight's game, they needed a win. Obviously, it's going to be much more difficult to get that now with no Luka Doncic,
sure.
But they got to find a way to get a win over these next couple of games.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you look at the standings, they're getting very close to being in that play-in seeding.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely like last season, when injuries after that All-Star break really started to pile up, that they went from what were they third or fourth in the West right around the time they made that trade. And then that's kind of similar to how this is going in the month of December. But, at least with the way the season goes, when you have it happen in December, you have more ability to overcome it than when it happens quite literally.
You'd rather it happen now. If any time, you'd rather have it happen now than later on when you get to January, February, when you're trying to start moving toward, playoff pushes and thinking about playoff races in that way.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Because, this, winnable games against the Spurs, and then there's not too many of those coming up with that road trip as well towards the end of the month, depending on how these injury timetables look, because they go from, Minneapolis to San Francisco playing the Timberwolves and the Warriors, and then they play the Utah Jazz, which that one's a winnable game for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And, depending on who's in the lineup, by that time with the injury recoveries, that'll be important to watch. But overall, a lot of challenging games throughout the rest of the month. And then they have a 7-game homestand in January. So ideally, you would like to get some of those, key players back before that homestand, protect home floor, build some momentum, and then, recover some of what was lost with the standings outlook for sure.
Grant, tell the folks so they can find you. What you got going on, man?
For sure. Basically, a lot of Mavericks injury updates on DallasBasketball.com and everything else with writing about the team for sure.
Look, a laundry list of injuries at this point when it comes to this Mavericks team. You make sure you follow Grant on Twitter at Grant Avseth, and make sure you subscribe to his YouTube channel at Grant Avseth as well. You can catch me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports, Mavericks pre and post game host for you on 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. I'll have pregame coverage beginning tonight at 7 o'clock as the Mavericks take on the Houston Rockets in Houston. They take on the San Antonio Spurs on Saturday, and then, of course, on Christmas Day when they take on the Phoenix Suns. So a busy next few days for these Dallas Mavericks. You can catch me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Again, Mavericks pre and post game host for 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. We'll be off for the next few days. We're going to take a break and get you ready for Mavericks basketball coming up next Wednesday. We'll be off on Christmas Day because, we want you to spend time with with your friends and family for the holidays. So we're going to do the same as well, but we'll obviously be talking all things Mavericks basketball once we get back from the Christmas break as they play on Monday, and then we'll recap everything on the following Wednesday. So looking forward to being back with you on Wednesday for Inside the Mavs. We really appreciate you having joined us here on our live show here on Kevin Gray Sports here on YouTube. You can also download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Remember, Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak, your home of Dallas Mavericks basketball. And you can go to 971thefreak.com and you can also check out the podcast there and follow Inside the Mavs on Twitter at Inside the Mavs. Again, really appreciate all of you having joined us on our show here. We'll talk to you next Wednesday when we recap what happened against the Rockets, the Spurs, and the Phoenix Suns on Christmas Day. So looking forward to a busy show on Wednesday. For Grant Abseth, my name is Kevin Gray. This has been Inside the Mavs, your official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. Y'all have a good Christmas. We'll talk to you later. Peace.